All right, Jeff, we ready to get to the data?
Yeah, let's do it. So, pretty exciting topic. We're going to look at historical Big Ten football recruiting rankings. You're going to see where your team ranks. So, we're going to look at, we have two tables. This is the first one here. We have 10 years of historical recruiting data for all Big Ten schools. And this is based off the 247 sports composite rankings. So, just so you know, it's a great ranking. It's kind of like averaging some of the most popular recruiting sites. So it includes 247 Sports, Rivals, ESPN, and it lists others. And I took that data, and instead of giving grades to these teams, I saw some things that stood out to make me want to put these teams in the category. So we're going to be talking about these teams in light of how they fall into 6 different categories. The other thing to note is the 4 new Pac-12 teams that came into the fold, came into the Big Ten this year. They're listed in bold here. So they're going to be in bold font. And what I did is I basically ranked in the Big Ten as if those 4 teams were in the Big Ten for the last 10 years, right? To kind of keep things simple. So, JR, if you go back to the other one where it's the Big Ten rankings, just so we can see, as an example, if UCLA were in the Big Ten back in 2016, believe it or not, they would have had the 4th rated class in the Big Ten. So this really makes things more apples to apples, I feel. It really gives us a feel for where historically these teams stand. Now, we're going to try to keep it under an hour. This is chock full of information. I mean, we could go several hours easily on this. So, JR, we're going to try to keep it to under an hour.
Every time we say we keep it under an hour, they beg for 2 or 3 hours. So,
Yeah,
the podcasters might say they can't listen for an hour, but Philip and John always want 2 or 3 hours.
I hear you. And it's a struggle, right? I mean, frankly, the Big Ten with 18 teams, right? It makes it tough, right? So we're not going to go in depth on 18 teams, but I do want to try to hit on every team a little bit at least. So let's get to it. So the first group is the elite recruiters. So there's 2 teams that fall into this class. It's Ohio State and Oregon. They're in the deep green rows, you can see here. So you see 10 years of Ohio State ratings, right? Like Ohio State, when Urban Meyer came into the Big Ten in 2012, he changed the game when it came to recruiting in the Big Ten. I mean, he instantly took Ohio State to a whole different elite level. They were already good recruiters. And as you could see, Ryan Day has only continued that. I have the current coaches kind of boxed into the right. I'll point out that Ryan Day just completed his 6th year. And then prior to that, Urban Meyer had the 4 years before that to the left of this kind of like solid line between 2019 and 2020. So we're going to talk about the current coaches and a little bit about the prior coaches to them. But the bottom line is Ohio State consistently number 1. The only year under Ryan Day they weren't number 1 in the Big Ten was 2024. And then their average Big Ten recruiting finish is basically 1.4 over the last 10 years. And that really supports, not surprisingly, we also threw in a column, what is their 5-year overall winning percentage? So for Ohio State, they lead the Big Ten with an 86% winning percentage. So recruiting is vital to performance on the field. It doesn't always directly correlate, but it's extremely important, as you can tell from Ohio State. The only other thing I want to point out about Ohio State, they're really one of the big 3 national recruiting experts know it's Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. They're the big 3. Now, Ohio State comes in 3rd, and JR, if you go to the other national slide, you'll see that. So again, top row, Day consistently allowing Ohio State to finish in the top 5. Ohio State's 5-year average nationally is 3.8. So they're, very consistent here. And, Bama is number 1. Georgia's number 2 nationally over the last 5 years. And Ohio State is number 3 for sure. And they're all those schools recruit nationally, across every state. And that's what makes them elite. Let's talk to the second elite program in the Big Ten. That's Oregon. So AJ or JR, excuse me, switched back. That's right. So with the addition of Oregon to the Big Ten, Dan Lanning, they really have emerged, and they are the current biggest threat to Ohio State being the kings of Big Ten recruiting. And really going all the way back to Mario Cristobal's years from 2018 to 2021, he really took Oregon recruiting to a new level too. I mean, he had the class in 2019 that actually would have beat Ohio State, would have been number one, but landing the last 3 years would have been third in the Big Ten 3 years ago, then first 2 years ago, and then he was second this most previous year. So the 5-year average for Oregon is 2.4. And their 5-year winning percentage is 79%. So again, strong recruiting results and strong results on the field. JR switched over to the national rankings. And if you could see here, prior to Lanning's recent 3 years with the program, he's basically taken Oregon from a top 20 like recruiter nationally to a top 10 recruiter. So the last 3 years, 9th in the nation, 3rd in the nation, and 5th in the nation. Just super impressive. And, obviously they've got the Nike and NIL funding, all the different uniforms. I mean, Oregon has a chance to really, along with Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama, considered the top recruiter in the nation. So JR, any comments, surprises from our elite 2 recruiters in the Big Ten?
No, not really. I mean, this is this is what I expected. These are two of the programs that have had the best NIL in the Big Ten, so they're going to be two of the programs with the best recruiting classes in the Big Ten. That's just, I mean, that's what recruiting is nowadays. It used to be a little bit more romantic. It used to be a little bit more, oh, I always grew up loving this school, and you do hear that a little bit nowadays, but for the most part, unless they are a 3-star recruit and they're not going to make that much money, or a 2-star recruit or something like that, and you're battling against a group of 5 teams, these recruitments are typically going to turn into who can pay me the most money, especially with revenue sharing coming in. Now, I do hope that revenue sharing fixes things a little bit there, gives it a little bit more of an even playing field, but there are still going to be some teams that prioritize recruits over other teams. So if say Zion Ely, Ohio State wants them, well, guess what? Maryland probably wants them a whole lot more because he would be a huge piece of their team. So with the allocated revenue sharing, Maryland might go after Zion Ely more with some of that money. I'm just using him as an example this year. We'll get to Maryland a little bit later on, but I do think that that's interesting there. And as far as I'm concerned, it's about money now more than anything, and that's how it's going to be probably moving forward, unless we get some kind of regulation or something from the NCAA, which I would not. This is the NCAA. You don't want to hold your breath with them. But unless you get some kind of regulation or something, this is just the way it's going to kind of be here for a little while. I will say, even if there is some kind of regulating, you best believe that if things are not properly managed and things are not properly looked at, the bag man will return in the SEC, and you will see a lot of these recruiting numbers for teams like Oregon. Now, not so much the same because, excuse me, they got better with their NIL and stuff like that, so they'll probably remain up there. But you'll see a lot of these numbers start to go down again because as we know, the SEC will utilize the bag man. They will pay recruits whether it's legal or not, and that will affect things. But we have another episode on the Big Ten versus the SEC, so I don't want to get into that too much.
We will. So let's jump into our second category. So I'm calling these top 20 recruiters. They're in the light green, so rows 3 and 4 here. So that's Michigan and Penn State as of now. Michigan clearly comes in third, although Penn State is close.
I apologize, Jeff. Can I interrupt really fast?
Yes.
We just had a couple people say a few things in the chat, and I forgot to bring those up. So let's get to the chat really fast, and then we'll continue on. Philip says, how much do you account for player retention and transfer portal addition? I think this is interesting, Jeff. So I'm curious your thoughts. My thoughts are if you are being run well and being run efficiently, you put a whole lot more into recruiting than you do transfer portal. But if you are a team that you just got a new coach and you're trying to bring players in like a Kirk Cinetti, I almost guarantee you Indiana has spent a whole lot more on the transfer portal right now than they have on recruiting. Now, could that change eventually? I'm sure that will change eventually, but at least for right now, Indiana, they're not going to win 11 games again with the talent that they had before. They have to go into the portal and get some talent, Fernando Mendoza, Roman Hemby, some of those other guys. And so that's what's going to bring them there. But other programs like Illinois, right? They were steady. They built with the recruiting and stuff like that. They go into the portal sometimes and get some guys. So it just kind of depends on where your program is at. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I would just say this is definitely just pure high school level recruiting. Um, bring in the transfer portal. I'll actually probably do a future one where we'll look at that too, along with the high school. But for purposes of not trying to overwhelm people with data, I didn't want to do that here, right? I would maintain, though, that, as a Florida State even learned, yes, you can, through the portal, really supplement a roster and have great success, but it can be fleeting. And we found that out. They went, from 12 and 0 one year in the regular season to 2 and 10. And so the best teams know, especially in football, with the number of players you need, and it's different than basketball where, grabbing one or two players out of the portal can just make an amazing difference. You need more than just one or two players in football. So having a solid base, if you will, of good high school recruiting is going to be very important for long-term stability of your program, is what I would maintain.
For sure, for sure. And transfer portal rankings are kind of difficult to deal with. I think recruiting rankings are
Big
a whole
time.
lot better to rely upon. Transfer portal, we're still trying to figure that out a little bit because there's teams that do really well in the transfer portal and then they don't. And like you said, Florida State, they did really well in the transfer portal and they got way worse. So how does that always work out? It's really, really interesting. Brooks is also pointing out that Ohio State is in a city. They have Fortune 500 companies. Other places are screwed. It definitely does help to be in a city. You have some more opportunities for NIL there. Maybe some more people, and also I don't think people realize this so much, but with Ohio State, there's a lot of companies, restaurants, bars, stuff like that, that require Ohio State to be good to keep them in business. So they're going to do whatever they can to try and keep the Ohio State football team good because if they're not good, people are out less often going to football games, which means they're coming to your restaurant a whole lot less often, or they're going to get drinks a whole lot less often, or, they don't want to watch the big game, so they're not going out to someplace. It is an interesting concept there. So, any thoughts on the cities and the companies and stuff like that, Jeff?
I mean, not big other than I do think it offers more NIL opportunities, certainly appealing for bigger cities. I think another factor here, why recruiting is still going to matter is if you can show that you can produce NFL talent, that's going to be very attractive. So some families really look at the long term. Yes, NIL matters, but what school is going to develop me to allow me to get to the NFL where I can make some big time money, much more than you could from like short term NIL funding. And then there's niche programs, right? There's Iowas of the world who show they're a tight end factory. You come to Iowa, we're going to produce great offensive linemen and defensive backs that make it to the NFL. So NFL production is a big thing. And I can guarantee we will be talking in future episodes about what schools are best at generating NFL prospects and by position. It's going to be pretty compelling as well. But that's future topic.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting one. I remember us talking about that. That's going to be a fun episode. And then, of course, as soon as we were talking about recruiting, I thought Mike might be in here reminding us. He says, "How about PJ going in and stealing the top player out of Wisconsin for the second time in 3 years?" Gavin, is that Mailer commits to Minnesota over the in-state Badgers and others. I mean, this is this is what happens in recruiting. You can have a really strong program, but if you fall off for a year or two, your recruits are in danger of going elsewhere. PJ Fleck, like we have pointed out, he has done a good job of getting players to the league. And so if it's between Minnesota and Wisconsin and they're offering competitive NIL with each other, guess what? If I was an offensive lineman, I might be looking a little bit more at Minnesota too, because PJ Fleck has shown that he can get you ready for the NFL, and Luke Fickell has shown that right now, Wisconsin's on a little bit of a downturn. So it's just even that much more important to make sure that you keep a solid program, because stuff like this, or Meyer Phillips says, I apologize, Meyer, it's just that much more important.